behave. I mean, have you ever thought about when you got really, really hungry around 3 o'clock in the afternoon? How did that impact your mood? Did you feel irritable or grumpy or angry? That was really just your blood sugar talking, and a whole host of other chemical reactions that impacted your mood, your ability to think, and how you were feeling. So our body is a container for all of these reactions, and the body is trying to do is to accomplish equilibrium. So as we are going through our day and we're experiencing different stressors, our body is attempting to stay at a very equilibrium state of being, which can take up quite a bit of energy. So think about your container. We're going to look at that. And also, I want to introduce you to Francis. Francis is our little demo guy here, and he's going to be a demo of how stress can impact us throughout the day and how that can impact our containers, if you will. Now, let me give you a little background on Francis. He's a 45-year-old man, project manager, manages a team of 4 to 5 people. He was promoted in the last year. And what he has been noticing is that he's really, to manage his new workload, coming in an hour early and leaving an hour later from work. Also doing a little more work at night after his children go to bed. And a little bit of work is creeping into the weekends. I'm not sure if there's anyone that can relate to that. He's also sleeping about 4 to 6 hours a night, and has noticed increased fatigue and colds and flus over the last year. So we're going to use Francis's habits as a way to explore how some of his habits may not be actually creating optimum performance for him throughout the day in terms of mental strain, perhaps lowering his performance over time and contributing to those health consequences. So a little background on Francis. Now let's get into the mind. This is really where I love to talk about the mind in terms of our performance and our ability to think. To improve our thinking, we really need to understand our problem, which is our brains. It is pretty amazing that our brain is an amazing instrument, but it also has many limitations. And once we understand what those limitations are, we can actually use it a lot more effectively. So a couple things I want to share with you. We're going to look at how we stress out the brain, being in fight or flight throughout the day, overworking our brain, and information overload. I'm going to just touch on those 3 today, give us some solutions with that. Some interesting brain facts is that it's a pretty small organ when we think about it. It's maybe 2 to 5% of our total body, about 3 pounds, but it uses up 20% of the energy that you are using in your body, 20%. So it's a very energy hungry part of the body. And I think about that in terms of your food. 1/5 of everything on your plate is going to go to your brain. The brain also has a ton of water. It is 80% water, and it's essential for all of those chemical reactions that help us with thinking, decision-making, strategy, etc. So water is really critical for the brain as well. To make it super simple, I'm just going to go over 3 pieces of the brain that are going to be important for our conversation today. Of course, we got the spinal cord coming up there. We have the hindbrain, which is also known as the reptilian brain. This is the oldest part, most primitive. And of course, we share it with reptiles. And that's really taking care of all the things we don't have to think about, breathing and blood pressure, and even regulating various blood sugars and things like that. So that's really managing a lot of that for us. Then we have the midbrain, or what we call the emotional brain. This part of the brain we also share with other mammals, and it's where the emotions reside and where a memory begins. Particular relevance to this conversation is that the amygdala lives right here, and our amygdala is our alarm system. It says, I'm in danger or I'm not in danger, and we're going to talk more about that in a second, but it really has no past. It is really in the present, and when your alarm goes off, you're going to be either going to fight, you're going to flight, or you're going to freeze. So it triggers other responses in the body. Might have noticed when you have experienced something that's very stressful, your palms may get sweaty, your heart rate may go up, and of course we release stress hormones. So that's the midbrain. The neocortex, which is our rational brain, this is where all of those, the gray matter is and all those wrinkles in the brain. That's really part of our thinking part of the brain. And we share this significant amount of brain with a number of other mammals like the primates and dolphins. But we actually have the largest part of this brain. And this is where we find the brain power for language and abstract thought and consciousness, imagination. And what's really relevant to our conversation today is the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is really in the front part of our brain, and that's our true command center. It's really controls a lot of our high-level emotions It's the CEO of the brain, and it's responsible for reasoning, problem solving, judgment, impulse control, ability to prioritize and make effective decisions. So you can imagine in the workplace how important it is to have this part of the brain functioning throughout the day. So I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the brain when we're stressed. First of all, we have a fight or flight. That's the amygdala. It's on or it's off, and that is really there for us to survive. Very, very important for survival. And we know with the past year, the number of natural disasters that have happened, we know people truly have been in a survival mode during that time. So they're either going to fight or flee. That's what typically happens with animals. That's the same thing for us. Now, yes, there are circumstances where we are in a survival situation, but often what's happening in the workplace is that we feel threatened, not by a tiger, but instead we feel threatened by some sort of demand. We perhaps may have hurt feelings. Something may have threatened our ego. Something happened that said, I am in threat, and that response occurs. Now, of course, we don't have a tiger in front of us. It could just be an email. And a lot of times what we're seeing in the workplace is that we actually freeze, meaning we're not actually fighting our computer. We're not actually running away from it either, but we're staring at it, trying to contemplate what next to do. And so the freeze can be where you're feeling really overwhelmed and you really just don't know what direction to go. That's what tends to happen. So the freezing can be really a place where we have to just stop and shut down. And that's what's really very simply going on in the brain when we're having that stress response. But I want to actually go through a hand model with you. So if you're not driving, I'd love for you to participate with me. And this comes from Daniel Siegel's work. He's a professor and doctor in UCLA, and he has this great hand model that I think is very, very useful for us to understand how this works. So if you have your hand up, just like the picture here, and again, we're going to have the spinal cord coming up. We can think of the hindbrain as sort of your palm here. The amygdala is going to be your thumb. I'd love for you to put your thumb right next to your palm. Okay, so it's inside the hand. Now the cortex is going to be their fingers. So I want you to wrap your fingers around your thumb. So much like this. Oh, I have a little picture here. So you're much like this. Okay, now feel how much contact you have. Like that, that's your whole brain. You can feel that you have quite a bit of contact with all parts of your brain. All brains are communicating. And in particular relevance here is I want you to think of your fingernails as that prefrontal cortex, that CEO of the brain. Now, what happens when we're stressed is a very interesting process. And actually, I want you to flip your fingers up, so they're facing up. So your thumb is still in, but your fingers are going up towards the ceiling. I think you probably have heard, and there might be some different wording around the world, but someone says I was out of my mind, or he just lost it, or she freaked out, or I flipped out. Well, actually, that is actually what's happening in the brain. So you can feel now your prefrontal cortex, which is your fingernails, do not have very much communication with the rest of the brain. And so what happens is that lower part of the brain actually hijacks the upper part. So we have very, very little communication occurring between that decision-making, very important decision-making process, and the rest of the brain. So that's where we can say things that we didn't mean, etc. This is not a good place to make decisions in the workplace. So this will happen to us, of course, throughout the day. There are ways for us to learn to be less triggered so that stress response doesn't go off. But something inevitably will occur and we'll get into that panic mode. If you've ever lost something that you've been working on for a number of hours, you can probably relate to that panic you may feel. So what I want to teach you guys today, so now you can just bring your hands down if you haven't already, is how do we calm the brain down? So how do we then get those fingers, if you will, over top of our thumb again to make sure that the whole brain is communicating effectively? There's a number of ways to do it, and it actually can only take a few minutes to do so. The first one is breathing. Just taking a few minutes. So if you feel that panic and you've gone into that response, just take a few seconds to just breathe and focus on your breathing. That can calm the brain down. What we're trying to do is get, again, the prefrontal cortex communicating with the rest of the brain so we can make more effective decisions. The next part is actually putting our hands on the head. You may notice this young lady here is looking stressed. She's got her hands on her head. Well, we naturally do that. The reason why we tend to put our hands on our head when we're stressed is because during fight or flight, 80% of the blood has gone to our arms and legs to then fight or flee whatever the threat is. Because at that point, making a high-level decision is not as important as either getting away from this threat. So you can actually on purpose put your hands on your head just to help bring back the blood up into your brain. That will also help to calm the brain down so you can make more effective decisions. The next is actually picturing a blue sky, and this has a lot to do with neuroscience, which I'm not going to get into all the details of that because you can just try it to see if it works for you. But just imagining your brain, the inside of your brain is a blue sky for a few minutes will actually also calm it down so that then you can make more effective decisions and move into action. Listening to soothing music, if that fits you, again, doesn't have to be long, 3 to 5 minutes. Soothing music that works for you can also calm the brain down. Going for a walk is a terrific way, connecting with nature, looking at birds outside, whatever it is that you appeals to you in nature can also be very helpful in calming the brain down. Empathy. Empathy is also a fabulous opportunity to calm the brain down because then all of a sudden we're thinking about somebody else and not our particular problem. So thinking about a pet or someone that you love and just taking a few minutes to connect in your own mind about that person and have empathy for them, for what's going on for them, can help us to calm our brain down. Again, what we're doing is finding a strategy to get the whole brain communicating more effectively. Positive thoughts and affirmations can also work well. So if you've lost a document that you need, kind of just calming your brain down by saying you're going to find it, or ultimately this meeting is still going to go extremely well. Positive affirmations can also calm our brain down because it really ultimately helps us to rethink or reframe the threat that's essentially attacking us. So those are some simple things to do to calm that brain down to make more effective decisions. The next piece I want to talk about is what actually makes us drained. Well, being stressed in fight or flight does drain our energy, but there's a couple other things that also impact our energy. And so simply put into two simple buckets. It's too much roaming around in our mind. When the people that mention difficulty sleeping or worrying, you guys probably relate to that. There's too much going on inside your mind when you're stressed. Or there's too much input from our outside environment actually into our senses, whether that be tactical, into our eyes, nose, etc. So we want to make sure we're managing both of these things to help us use our brain effectively. So I want to talk just briefly about overworking the brain. A lot of times people can think that the brain can keep thinking all day long. It's just absolutely not true. And we might have experienced that around 3 or 4 o'clock when we sort of just shut down and we're not thinking as clearly or effectively. Well, it turns out that the prefrontal cortex truly is like a battery, and it only has so much thinking power every single day. And right now, the way that our brains are all built, you can really think effectively for only 8 hours a day. So if you're working longer than that, you're working a lot of long hours and not taking brain breaks, you're actually going to be draining your energy. So you won't have as much energy to go home with. And you're actually putting a lot of stress on your brain. And so, yes, can you do that here and there? Absolutely. The problem is when we're doing it over the long term. So again, when we go back to Francis, his strategy was to come in early or late. That's okay every now and again, but doing that over time can actually impact our brain, and the stress hormones that get released in the body can impact memory over time. So really, we can only think 8 hours a day, and that's only with taking brain breaks. So I really encourage you, if every 90 minutes to 2 hours that you take a break from technology, from information, and just take even 5 to 10 minutes to allow the energy of your prefrontal cortex to increase. So just like when you use your cell phone all day long, the battery starts to drain. This is exactly the same thing that's going on in the brain. A couple other things that really impact the brain's energy is multitasking. That's when you're trying to do 2 thinking tasks at the same time. So maybe you're listening to this conference call and maybe you're doing email at the exact same time. That is multitasking. The brain is actually trying to do 2 things at once. So I know there's lots of things that we are trying to get done in every single day, but multitasking drains our brain energy. So again, later in the day, we won't be as effective. So I would really encourage you to monotask. One task, then the other, then the other. That will ensure that your brain has the energy to keep working effectively during the day. Another major drain on the brain, and it can be overworked the brain, is the number of decisions or choices each day. If you've ever gone into a restaurant that's got like a big menu up on the board and there's like 1,000 choices, it can feel very overwhelming. What are you going to order? Well, that's what the brain is going through all day long. And every single decision that you make can actually impact, and your brain becomes less effective during the day. So we're talking about small decisions, because the average person makes about 1,000 decisions a day between what they're going to wear, how they're going to get to work. Do I do this first or that second? And so all of these little decisions wear on the energy of our brain power. So some things to think about, especially on days where you have a big meeting or you're wanting to get into more creative thinking, if you're creating products, is you want to minimize your decisions that day. So that means you may pick out your clothes at night. You may already have your food prepared the day before. You've already decided which route you're going to take, when you're going to go. So doing that the night before can actually support you having less small decisions in the day, so you can actually focus on those bigger decisions or creative thinking that you need to do. Just some simple things that we tend to overlook in terms of our brain power. So remember, your brain is like a battery. It gets drained throughout the day. So there's some things to think about. Part of that also is information overload. We all live in the information age through various degrees, I'm sure, around the world, but we're bombarded by tons of information throughout the day. That also is a big drain on our brain power. So remember, the brain takes up a lot of energy to work effectively, and it also needs various things, and it needs those brain breaks because of the information overload. So there's a couple of things to think through here. Too much information to process. That is something that can impact our ability to focus and our ability to get into deep thinking, strategy, creative thinking, etc. We also get, when our brain gets tired, we get more distracted. So we want to really think about not clogging up our system or our brain with too much information. And that includes reading newspapers, blogs, magazines, TV, social media, surfing the web, etc., including our work information. And stop and think for a second about your stomach. When you eat, obviously it's digesting food, right? It's working to digest food. Well, the brain is doing the exact same thing, and it has to work and use energy to digest all that information. So we want to limit that when we can and when it makes sense for us. So when you're taking a brain break that I encourage you to take earlier, that doesn't mean that you get onto any social media. You want to actually get away from your phone, get away from information, so the brain is not processing so much at one time. Another way that we can tend to use the brain ineffectively is storing a lot of actions inside the brain. So we know we can only usually think of 3 things at once. And then, so let's say something else comes popping in. All of a sudden you need to review a document. And you can't do it right this second. Well, some of those actions get stored in the back of the brain, and they come up every now and again and remind you to do this and that. Now, this is one of those things. Can you do it? Yes. Should you do it? No. Does your brain store lots of things? Yes. Can you store lots of actions in there? Yes. Is it effective? No. And the reason is every time you store a piece of information in there, especially action-oriented information, it's actually taking up quite a bit of energy in the background. So if you want energy to think clearly, to be focused, to be at your best self at work, you actually want to write all of your actions down somewhere, so the brain is not having to track it in the background and taking energy away from other things you could be doing. So one quick suggestion for you is to get a system that you trust and get all those actions out of your head. If you like paper, writing them down as they're coming up throughout the day to keep your mind clear. If you like electronic system, you can also do that. Simply use Word or Tasks in Outlook. OneNote, if you're familiar with OneNote, maybe you're putting all your tasky stuff into OneNote. And if you're not familiar with OneNote, what's great is next month, we're going to have a 1-hour webinar on OneNote to get you familiar with that. So the idea here is get a system that you trust and start putting all your actions in one place so your brain is not overloaded by that information. So some quick takeaways on the brain. Calm the brain down before you make important decisions or taking action. We want to take several breaks during the day to recharge the mental energy of the brain. That's going to help you to be more effective, easier for you to focus, less procrastination, etc. And then use your 8 hours of brain energy wisely. That includes limiting multitasking and being a monotasker. That includes really being mindful of the information your brain has to process each and every day. So that's the brain. All right. So what about the body, right? What's going on with the body and how do we stress out our body? Thomas Edison here said the chief function of the body is to carry the brain around. Well, that's partly true, right? Partly the body has its own ideas as well, and it wants to function in certain ways. And we can actually impact the body, though, in terms of the stress hormones being released by our mental stress. And when we're in fight or flight, I call that double duty, because now not only are we not thinking clearly when we're in this fight or flight state, but we release a ton of stress hormones into our body, which then the body then has to process. So we can see here that the body is already getting full, if we look at it as a container, both of the mental impact and also the hormones through the body. Another way to look at it here is what is going on when we're in fight or flight? Well, there's a couple things. We, of course, talked about what's going on in the brain, but we know that our heart rate increases, our blood pressure goes up. So if that's a concern for you, think about that being your blood pressure being high throughout the day. It can upset our stomach. We can get ulcers at the high end of that. We can just get an upset stomach. We can get nervous. The big one is also really suppresses our immune system. It only takes literally a little bit of stress for our immunity to go down. So that's a big one. Joints also is impacted. And then, of course, it decreases our hormones. And so we want to make sure that we're not putting our body into this fight or flight state. And even if you do, then the question is, how quickly can you get your body back to equilibrium? Those are using some of the tools I've already given you. So that's just kind of a quick snapshot of what's going on with stress in the body. So I'm kind of curious, again, from the group here, which event do you think is the most stressful on the human system? And I'm going to launch another poll here to kind of get your feedback. Let me launch that so you guys can put your answers in here. What does this group think? We got 176 people on the call. Okay, it looks like we got most answers in here, which is great. I'm going to close this up so we can see the results. I'm going to share it. So 41% felt like the loss of a job or major financial distress. Second highest was death of a loved one, and a little bit lower on the other ones. Well, guess what? You were all correct. All 5 of these things are the top 5 things that can impact the human system the most in terms of stressful events. So in this circumstance, and if you're going through any of these, I really, really encourage you to implement some of the strategies for today just to support the body. And we're going to get more into that because it really does make a huge impact. You know, loss of income or loss of a job is huge. Losing a loved one, the grief that we're going through is also, of course, tough on our systems. So again, that doesn't mean any of those go away, but the question is, how can we manage them so that we're not stressing out our system? So we're going to talk about 3 ways we tend to stress out the body. And I'm going to be going through this one pretty quickly because I'm going to really just pinpoint a couple key features here. We're going to talk about movement and water, the lack of adequate sleep and recovery time, the type of fuel we're using, and the impact of skipping lunch. So the body, exercise. We all know exercise is important for lots of different reasons. Fitness, health, our mind, all these different things. The one thing I want to just pinpoint today is that concept of the stress when we're in fight or flight, the stress hormones going throughout our body. That's adrenaline and cortisol. You might have heard those terms before. The fastest way for us to help the body to release those chemicals out of our system is movement. And it can be intense exercise. It could be going for just a walk for 20 minutes. It's the fastest way. If you've had a very stressful day with lots of demands, you knew you were in fight or flight a lot during the day, fastest way to support your body is to go for a brisk walk or a run or any other exercise. That helps the body. Again, if you think about the fight or fleeing, that's an action-orientated event, but we tend to be just freezing. So we have to get those hormones out of the system. So really encourage you to put some movement in your day, more so for the stress perspective than anything else. Importance of water. Well, I talked about earlier that the brain is 80% water, and ultimately the body itself is 50 to 65% water. So, and the brain works a lot better when it's got the ingredients it needs to function. So if we're dehydrated, it can actually impact our thinking. So we want to make sure we're keeping the brain hydrated, the body hydrated as well. Of course, our heart pumps out like 2,000 gallons of blood a day, and keeping hydrated also supports the heart. So again, we're starting to see that connection between what we do for the body impacts the brain, etc. Goes both ways. The other thing I want to leave you with water is this is the second most important thing that you can do to help wash out some of the toxins or chemicals that get created from us being stressed. So water really helps to flush out the system. So that's another reason it's really important. And of course, the brain works better when we don't have as many toxins inside of our body. So I'll leave you with that, just to kind of think through, maybe this is something you can do is to start to support your performance at work by just increasing your water intake. Half your body weight in ounces, or 2 to 4 liters of water each and every day. The next is sleep. This is also critical. You could be doing all those other things, and if you have not a good night's sleep, I'm sure we've all experienced that, tossing and turning. Well, we don't always feel great the next day. And of course, there are some people that do better on 4 or 5 hours of sleep than others, but sleep is the number one thing I would say that impacts our brain performance during the day. So think about that for a second. So not only do we need water, not only do we need movement, but we also need a really good night's sleep. It helps us to stay focused, it helps us to refocus from distractions, and it makes making decisions easier. I'm sure that makes complete sense to a lot of people who have had a bad night's sleep and have that foggy or unclear thinking. It also helps with learning and memory consolidation. It also reduces the chance of any mental illness or depression. So sleep is really a big factor in that. Again, I go back to that recovery piece. Yes, movement is great. Yes, water is terrific, but the body needs to recover from the demands of the day. So sleep is the time where the brain and the body start to repair itself. The brain starts to file away memories and various things. It's also trying to flush out, things that it doesn't need anymore. And the body's doing the same thing. So in order for us to repair our body and to detox, we really do need a good night's sleep. And the organ our body is very much like a system. Our organs actually have certain hours where they're repairing themselves. So if we're not getting a full night's sleep, we're not getting as much repairing as we need. So maybe perhaps you can think about lowering your stress level by increasing your sleep. It also helps us to just regulate our emotions more effectively. So I hope at this point you're starting to see the importance of taking care of ourselves and recovery to be at our best. These are the things that help us to perform in the workplace. And maybe you're starting to see how our habits are actually creating stress inside of our systems. So of course, we have animals that do a really good job of sleeping. These two sleep 3/4 of their life because it's so important for their systems. Well, it's also very important for our system to manage and repair. So the last part of the body section I want to talk about is the fuel that you're using. And it's very important that we feed the brain. It is a very energy hungry part of the body, and it needs fuel. It needs fuel to perform and to think correctly. So the question is, what fuel are you using? Are you using really healthy foods, or you tend to be grabbing the quick snacks that are high in sugar or carbohydrates? This will also impact how you're feeling during the day, both for your body and your mind. Now, we could spend a couple hours just on nutrition. And what's great is we have another webinar coming up in July that will really dive deeper into nutrition and productivity. Today, what I'm interested to talk about with you is the impact of skipping lunch. I hear this a lot in the business world, at least in North America. I'm not sure if that's a worldwide phenomenon, but people get really busy and they skip lunch. So let's talk about the impact of that. Of course, breakfast and dinner, those are all important, but today we're talking about lunch. So here we go. Here, we're going to get back to Francis here. We know Francis, today he's got a pretty big meeting happening at 3 o'clock. He got to work early, as we talked about. He's coming in early as a strategy. He's got some demands on him today. So we can already see that he's got demands and probably a stress going on in terms of his the mental space. So he gets to work. He might have grabbed something for breakfast. The question is, was it something that kept his body at a great state of equilibrium? So your blood sugar is very, very important in how we perform every day. So again, the body wants to stay at equilibrium. We'd like the blood sugar to keep pretty steady throughout the day. It really can only do that if we're eating a good amount of fiber and greens and protein as part of our meals. Sometimes what happens is we get so busy, we're on the go. Maybe we grab a muffin in the morning. That's going to elevate our blood sugar. Now, in this case, as I was mentioning, Francis has got a meeting at 2 o'clock. He's got some demands on him, very important meeting presentation to get to. He skips lunch to get to his meeting at 2 o'clock. Well, what happens then is the blood sugar is going to be dipping down. This is where we can start to feel even a little bit irritable, or we're hungry for sure, but also irritable, things like that. So now what's happening is we're stressing out the body. Blood sugar is dipping down, and that's typically where we make poor choices with food. Our body says, I just need anything. Doesn't matter what it is. So now we grab a Snickers bar, or maybe we grab another muffin. We're not always at that moment wanting to choose a salad. Part of that has to do with the body wanting to get back to equilibrium. So this is what I call the zone of willpower. We can have our blood sugar dip down and you'll be able to pick a good choice. Once our blood sugar gets too low, that's often where we're just going to grab absolutely anything because we want to, again, get our blood sugar back up. The problem with this is twofold. One, we're going to spike our blood sugar up, and eventually that will also go down. So now we're yo-yoing throughout the day, hugely stressful on our body. So even though you're working away, you may not be paying any attention to your body, it's being stressed by us not feeding it. Also, the brain needs energy to keep going. So you might actually be stressing out your brain power and really lowering your brain power by not fueling it. The other part that I find interesting is the zone of willpower again. So maybe we don't choose the best thing at lunch, but because our blood sugar is yo-yoing up and down, generally at the end of the workday, we're exhausted, we feel fatigued, and we don't feel like going to do other things that may support us. Maybe we don't feel like going for a walk. Maybe we don't take the dog for a walk. Maybe we don't go to the gym. So again, the idea of lunch is to really support your system, choosing really good foods, but keeping your blood sugar pretty steady so you can be at your best self, both emotionally and your system not being so stressed out. Lunch, so critical. So now what we have here is we have, here Francis has this big meeting. We got stress hormones being released, mental strain. We've got unstable blood sugar from a lack of adequate fuel. And then of course, if we don't feel like sleep, if we don't get a good night's sleep, we don't feel like movement, we didn't drink enough during the day, we're actually leaving those chemicals lingering inside of our system. So now our system, or our container, is getting a little more clogged up, if you will, which impacts the way the body functions. So let's talk about our environment. So our body, taking care of that, really important, easy things, drink lots of water, get a good night's sleep, and fuel your brain. But how does our environment impact us? Well, we all know we're experiencing some environmental toxins are increasing around the world that has to do with pollution, combustion, a number of different things. And that's something to be mindful of because the body then also has to process the things we're breathing and eating. Here are 5 sources of toxicity: industrial chemicals and combustion, pesticides in our food. That's not very good salad dressing, right? Plastics, which actually have chemicals in that mimic hormones in our body that can disrupt our system. Heavy metals, food additive, and preservatives. So these are 5 sources of toxicity for the body. And then again, we start looking at the body as a container. So it's not only just managing all those other things that we talked about, but now all of a sudden it has to manage toxins from the environment as well. It's having to process the food. So then the environment is also stressing out our system, potentially putting it into fight or flight, potentially just releasing more of those stress hormones, and it's having to process all of this information and toxins, right? So what happens over time is our body gets inflamed. So yes, we can manage stress pretty well here and there, but when we have it chronically, we start to see that the body is getting fairly stressed and our container is getting full. This is where our body starts to break down and where disease can start to come in. This is where our body is truly in a state of dis-ease, disease. Now that could be just fatigue for some of you, or it could eventually over time turn into more serious things like cancer, autoimmune disorders, etc., because stress is the number one proxy to most human disease. So when our body is stressed, it's allowing all these other things to potentially come in and affect our system. So the thing I want you to really think through is the stuff that we're putting in our body. Our body's working pretty hard in the background to manage the toxins generated internally from stress and demands as well as externally. We don't always connect the dots between energy needed for this daily cleanup and how we feel. So I want you to think through that. Think about this just for 1 second. Imagine if all you did in your house was, you need to get those toxins out. Think about the cleaning. What if all you did in your house for 30 years was just to clean it, but you never did any repairing? You'd have a really clean house, but wouldn't it be kind of falling apart? Something needs to be painted, the deck's falling apart. And so if you think about your body over 30, 40 years, if all it's doing is focusing on cleaning the toxins out, and there's probably too much coming in that we can get out, it doesn't have a lot of time to repair itself. And that's where the healing needs to happen. So we have to do things to help the body to stay cleaner. So it's not spending just as much time on cleaning out the toxins from stress, but it actually helps us to repair the body. Again, that's what's going to be critical to keep us healthy long-term and to keep us performing at a high level. So 3 simple solutions to think about. Easy things that we could start to do today. Avoid processed foods and additional chemicals. Processed foods have lots of things that we don't need in them, and lots of chemicals the body does not want or doesn't even know what to do with. So we want to eat whole foods, fruits and veggies. We want to avoid plastics for food storage, for water, and for reheating, because those hormones or the chemicals that mimic hormones get into our food. We want to use natural cleaning products and lotions to support the body being less stressed and having to do less cleaning so it can do the proper repair that it needs to stay healthy. We also want to support the body by decluttering it. We can cleanse the system in many, many ways, and I encourage you to think through that and talk to your healthcare providers about that. You can do fasting or intermittent fasting. We can get onto certain cleanses that help to clean the organs and the systems. Now, there's definitely that piece, but I also want to give you something you could start to do at home today. Epsom salt baths is a phenomenal way to support your system, lowering the stress level. Why? Because the magnesium and the sulfate do wonderful things to help flush out the toxins, help our brain, all that chemical reactions happening a little bit easier, something that we can do. Now, I recommend if you're going through a stressful time, 1 to 4 salt baths a week can really support your system, your body systems in managing the demands of what you're going through, whether that be job related or if you've lost a loved one recently. We want to support the body as much as we can. Easy thing. If you don't have a bathtub, you can easily get Epsom salts and just put it on your body, leave it on there for 5 minutes, and then wash it off while you're in the shower. This can be a simple thing that we can do to support our systems. The other thing, of course, is just move to the mountains. Cleaner air up there, right? But unfortunately, we all can't live in the mountains. So what is something that we can do to support our systems? House plants. Simple thing for us to do to help clean the air. During photosynthesis, plants actually, of course, release oxygen, absorb the carbon dioxide, but they also absorb other air pollutants such as ammonia and benzene as well. Plants can help with our immune systems in terms of allergies. It's been reported that students actually have a better concentration level when there's plants around. So just think through that in the workplace as well. Plants really interact with our body and our minds to improve the quality of life, our well-being, creativity, and greater happiness. So what's interesting is in the 80s, NASA actually did a study on plants, and what they revealed was that these benefits, and the question is, how many do we need to make a benefit, right? Simple thing we can do. How many? Well, NASA recommends placing 18 plants in an 1,800 square foot house. So you can kind of think about 1 plant for, every 100 square feet to help purify the air. Now, which ones are going to be the most helpful for you? So these have been scientifically proven for air purification and stress reduction. So I put those up there for you to have a quick glance at. What I would love to bring to your attention, because I'm into efficiencies, is the 3 here that do both. So the snake plant, spider plant, aloe vera are 3 plants that really support both air purification and quality of sleep and stress reduction. So that might be something very easy you can do in your space, whether it's at home or in the offices, to be bring in a couple plants to help support the air quality that you have. Remember, less stuff for the body to process, less clutter. Which brings us to our final source of toxicity, and that is of clutter. This is often an unrecognized contributor to our stress. But I want you to just take a look at these pictures. Both of these 2 pictures have a lot going on in them. There's lots of items in there for the brain to attempt to process. And now I'm going to change pictures, and I want you just to notice in your own body if there's a shift at all. Does that feel easier on your brain to process? I'm going to go back to this one. Here. Clutter can have such a huge impact on our mind. So I'm going to bring up a couple really important statistics that actually brings us back to brings our whole presentation together today with the mind. But clutter really ultimately bombards our systems with excessive stimuli, which goes back to that brain overload. It's too much for the brain to process all that information all of the time. So having a clean office, less clutter in your life is really important for the brain. Clutter can also distract us and pull our attention away. So we want to from our focus, which will not help us to get into deep creative thinking, or especially if you're working on products, etc. The last thing is it signals our brain that the work is never done. So it creates ultimately this stress response again. So it's difficult for our bodies to relax physically and mentally, and increases anxiety because we're not sure of the amount of effort it needs to get to that pile of whatever that pile is, whether it's paper or just clutter in our house. So again, that can also trigger us to go into a stress response cycle. We can also have those feelings of guilt as well, or embarrassment if we're not, happy with how our house is organized or our office is organized. So I want you to think through just that piece of it and maybe apply this concept of the inside outside. We want to manage the stuff that's roaming around in our mind. We want to manage the stuff that's coming into our environment to help us to be less stressed. Some key takeaways here as we sort of wrap up is just simplify. Simplify the ingredients in your food, lotions, and your cleaning supplies so your body is not having to process so many chemicals inside the body. Cleanse and declutter the system in various ways. There's lots of different ways to do that in fasting and cleanses and juice cleanses, but also salt baths will be an easy way to put that into your world. Simplify and declutter your workspaces and add some plants to clean the air. We want to simplify our lives so our body's not working so hard behind the scenes. So towards lower stress in our lives, rule of thumb, limit the amount of stuff that our body and mind has to process each day. That helps us. Now, if we can't limit it, what we want to do is make sure that we're engaging behaviors to get the body to release those hormones and other toxins out of our system so that we're keeping a cleaner container. This is where the body likes to perform the best. This is where it's going to be getting the best sleep and all those other things. And this is ultimately what's going to help us to stay healthy long-term in our life. We talked about 8 different approaches today. You could certainly start with any of them. Don't feel you need to do everything tomorrow. Start with a couple that you resonated with today, simple things that you can do. We actually have a handout. I'm going to show you where you can get access to that, but so you don't feel like you have to get all these. But I talked about 6 different things we want to limit to help lower your stress level, increase your performance. And I talked about 8 things today that you want to start to increase. And again, you can start with just 2 of them. That's the beauty of something like this. You can start with 2 things because ultimately all of these things have a compounding or ripple effect in our life. So maybe you want to start with just increasing your water intake to help your brain. Great. Then maybe in a month or so, you add another behavior in there to help support your system. So just remember, small changes can make a huge difference in terms of your body being able to process stress and then, of course, be able to focus better. So a little action plan. Again, this is also part of your handout, but I have you, as you leave today, get into your busy lives, think about a couple things. 1, think about some results that you want more of in your life and write those down. So I'd even have you, if you have a minute, to kind of jot those down. I put some examples up there. What is it that you want to experience more this year? Now choose 2 behaviors, okay? Because ultimately we're at a current state of where we are, and some of us are feeling extremely stressed. We want to get to somewhere else, right? What's in the middle is our habits, correct? So we're sort of in the business today of looking at some easy things that we can do to create new habits to lower our stress level. So what could those potentially be? I'd love for you to think about 2 behaviors from today's webinar that you want to start with this week. Maybe it's taking 5-minute brain breaks throughout the day. Maybe it's adding 2 additional glasses of water. Easy things that you can start to do to support your system. So as you leave today, think about how do you implement, how do you get to where you want to go with your behaviors? So as we close up, I just want to introduce the account manager for HPE, Sally McGee. You're going to be getting a thank you email for attending, which is actually going to give you some instructions on how to get into our McGee Learning System, which will have your handout there, also have a recording, a number of other great resources for you. Of course, you could always reach us on our website and connect with us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. You can also contact Sally. Sally's information is here if you have any questions, feedback, or referrals. So with that said, I would love to see if there are any questions. Take a second to do that. I know we're almost at the top of the hour here. And I also want to make sure that we have the ability to close out and complete the evaluation. We have an evaluation for you to take. Let me see if there's any other great questions I can answer. I do know we're at the top of the hour, so please, if you need to go, you can do that. So someone asked about the slides, and yes, you're going to have access to all of that great information. In addition, somebody asked about typical workday schedule. I mean, that's going to depend on when you start work and when you end work. But ultimately, I would think about, trying to work 8 hours, especially around thinking activities, and really incorporating more breaks in your day. You'll actually find that even though it's taking time away, it'll actually be more effective to get more information. So knowing that we are at the top of the hour, I'm going to encourage you to email Sally, or there's going to be another email that you're going to have access to, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions there, but I do want to be respectful of your time and close this up so you could take a few minutes to complete the evaluation. That would be great. Thank you so much. It was such an honor to be with you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to be with us and present today. Let me see if I can launch this eval for us. So thank you so much.